So our topic today is faster and safer websites, modern digital security that speaks for itself. I'm joined today by Kara Hall, the Senior Product Marketing Manager at Acquia. My name is Tim Lennon. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the Drupal Association, the 501c3 nonprofit that supports the Drupal project. And we're really excited to have you here and have a moment to talk about Drupal security, perhaps provide some education and some opportunity for you to learn some new things. So Kara, you had a quote you wanted to kick us off with.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tim. So we all know that security is something that is not just sometimes top of mind, it's always top of mind. And I think this Gartner quote is a great example of that. So security and risk executives face a critical juncture as the digital footprint of organizations expand and centralized cybersecurity control becomes obsolete. And that is from a Gartner report for 2022 covering the 7 top trends of cybersecurity. So what do we take away from that at Acquia? Next slide, please. A lost customer trust and degraded brand value can come from, a variety of threats that could take down your site or cause your site to perform slowly. And that also equals a loss in revenue from site downtime and higher costs to having to correct bad traffic or prevent bad traffic from happening. And then all of that impacts your business by bringing in an average hourly cost of an infrastructure failure being at $100,000, and then $141 is the average cost for each lost or stolen record containing sensitive or confidential information. So, with a security threat, meaning lost value for a business, it's important to make sure that security is always the forefront of mind, and it's the number one thing, or at least one of the number one things your organization is considering. So
Awesome.
Now that we've kind of set the stage, we can jump into the agenda of what we'll cover today. So we're going to cover a lot in a short amount of time, so you have to bear with us. We're going to move pretty fast through these topics, but we hope that, as Tim said, you'll learn something or have something to ask questions about. We're excited to take questions at the end, but those items we're going to cover are, we're going to meet the Drupal security team. We're going to cover the industry-leading security posture. We're going to cover the Drupal Steward program, which Acquia is a founding member of. We're going to cover off on supply chain security. And then last but not least, we'll close out with risk prevention and ways to build customer trust by avoiding downtime. So Tim, I'll pass it off to you to intro the Drupal security team.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Kara. So let's meet the Drupal security team. Some of you may know this. Some of you may have heard of the Drupal security team, or perhaps you have spent time in Drupal Slack or reading up on drupal.org/security, and you've heard this phrase, the Drupal security team. They're here to keep us safe. But who are they, and what do they do? So the Drupal security team is made up of 29 full-time or full team members and 5 provisional team members, and they're from all over the world. They're in Australia, Belgium, Canada, United Kingdom, the United States, and the other countries that you see listed here. And these are all Drupal experts, folks with a focus in security. Some of them work specifically on the technical side of security research. Some of them are more on the sort of communications and operational side of participating in the security program. And these people work directly with the maintainers of Drupal projects. So the contributed modules that are used, Drupal core, to work with those folks to resolve any reported issues that have a security impact. And they work with a responsible disclosure process and an operational model that's based on some industry standards. And these people come from a variety of places. They come from consultancies, from service providers, end users, nonprofit, for-profit, education. They come from all over the place. And in fact, if anyone out there is interested in participating and becoming part of the security practice for Drupal, that's something that you could do as well. And I'd be happy to point you in the right direction. And indeed, a number of these folks are on the team at Acquia and have devoted their time to supporting Drupal security at large. So the pillars of Drupal security posture are having these security experts from diverse regions across the world and from a diverse set of organizations with interests. Some have public sector interests. Some know the specific intricacies of government security practices, NGO, industry, all these sorts of places. They follow a responsible disclosure practice, which is sort of an industry standard idea in terms of how we receive security reports in a standardized way, triage them, work appropriately with maintainers in a confidential format, and then disclose the vulnerability and the fix with a coordinated response. And you'll see this in the again at Drupal.org/security in the calendar, how they have these security release Wednesdays, these windows when they do updates either to the contributed module ecosystem or to Drupal core. But you may not have understood exactly how all of this works. So that's something we're going to get into a little bit today. But I want to let Kara talk about Acquia's involvement in this team.
Sorry, I was on mute there. So I forgot I went on mute. My dog was barking and I was like, oh, don't want to put that on there. But Acquia sponsors more security team members than any other organization, and that's something that we're really proud to help support with Drupal. Acquia engineers have been credited in resolving 64 security advisories in the past 12 months, and that's just something that not only we benefit from as Acquia, since we support Drupal, but also something that we're just happy to support all Drupal users who aren't necessarily using Acquia. We're just happy to support Drupal and resolve any security issues or threats that come along the way. So we're really proud of Acquia's support in that security team.
And I would say that, as the CTO at the Drupal Association, the security team is a tremendous example of open source at its best, or people from organizations collaborating together to create a stronger security posture for the entire open web through the Drupal project, and in coordination even with other projects, right? Drupal depends on other software. There's coordination with PHP, there's coordination with CK Editor, there's coordination with Symfony, all of these other folks as well. And it's a really remarkable microcosm of the power of the open source at large. So let's do a little bit of this educational component, because many of you out there, I think, have probably seen a Drupal security advisory before, or if you haven't, this will be helpful to you, I hope. When a security advisory comes out, it's published on Drupal.org, or you see a link in your Drupal admin interface, particularly if you're managing security updates on your own and you don't have a managed services provider or someone to help you, like the Acquia team. You'll see something like this, where an advisory has a security risk section, and it provides a kind of highlighted score that says moderately critical, 13 out of 25, and has these like acronyms that mean all sorts of things. So what the heck is all this? What does it mean, and how can you interpret it and interpret the potential risk for your organization as you're getting ready to install these updates? So I'm going to run through these briefly. We're not going to dive too deep here. It gets pretty technical, but hopefully this will help you get an understanding of how we manage security. And before I dive too deep into it, I want to let you know that this scoring model is based on a publication created by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is a US government project as part of the Department of Commerce. As they say, when they first published this scoring system and report, no system is 100% secure. Every system has vulnerabilities. And anyone who tells you that we have a 100% secure software system is not being honest with you. What we have is the right software practices to properly identify, triage, and remediate any security issues if they happen. And that's what you want to see in a software project that you depend on. So it's not the existence of those vulnerabilities that matters, it's how we resolve them. And this is part of that. So the first portion of this 25-point score comes from access complexity. So it's an evaluation of the vulnerability that says, how hard is it for someone to actually get into that and like sort of trigger the vulnerability? And it's a score that goes from 1 to 4 points based on whether you have to be sort of logged in, whether it's a multi-step process, whether there's extra dependencies. And so this can add up to 4 points to this overall score, right? So the first factor is access complexity. Then authentication. Does an attacker need to have any kind of privileged access? Do they have to have compromised a user account or an administrative account to get there? Or can it happen with any or all kind of anonymous users, right? So in this particular case, again, it's a sort of 1 to 4 point scale that we rank the authentication risk for a score. So we've gone through this AC basic, A user, right? That's access complexity and authentication. As we continue, we see, does this have a confidentiality impact? So if this is vulnerable, does it expose confidential information, right? Maybe it doesn't actually have any impact on confidential data. Maybe it exposes some data, or maybe it makes all non-public data accessible. And again, a score that can be up to 5 points in this case. for that confidentiality impact. That goes into our score. We move on to integrity impact. So if something is exploited through a vulnerability, does this allow some other parts of the system or the data being handled by the system to be compromised? In other words, does it become a backdoor into other elements of the system, or a way to manipulate or change the data, or just sort of access that data? Again, a score out of 5 that goes into our threat assessment. Finally, does a known exploit exist? In some cases, when the security team is approached perhaps by a security researcher who says, we think this might be an issue, there may be no known examples of this being exploited in the wild. It's like, hey, there might be a door open there. We have no reason to believe anyone's used it. Or, hey, there's something out there and it's already being exploited, right? That's what we call a 0-day, a term you've probably heard before, right? Where, gosh, by the time we're made aware of an issue, it may already be exploited. And very fortunately, there have been extremely few 0-day concerns in Drupal's history, and touch wood, hopefully that will remain the case. Part of the reason for that is because we're an open source project and because we have really robust responsible disclosure policies, it's much more likely that security researchers will first identify and find these things and coordinate with us than that bad actors will have the resources to find it first, right? We have a strong enough team that we're much more likely to catch these things before outside actors. So that's very important as well. And then finally, target distribution, what percentage of users are affected, right? Does this only expose the data for, one portion of a website, one user role? Is it everybody on the site? Again, that can factor into the overall score. So these scores are used to generate a sort of overall risk assessment and kind of standardized model of understanding and comparing risks to each other. So if it's a low score, 0 to 4, it's considered a not critical security release. As you can see, as the score goes up, it becomes more critical. And critical and highly critical vulnerabilities, those tend to be the ones where it's like, is there a potential for a mass exploit? The kinds of ones that, to Kara's point earlier, are those very expensive potential risk items. So this model allows the security team to sort of triage their resources, to identify the most important things to address and put their energy and collaboration there. So I want to kind of sum this up. This is a quote from Julian King, who's the Security Union Commissioner for the European Commission, that says, "We need to move to a world where all companies providing internet services and devices adhere to a vulnerability disclosure policy." And I bring this up because Drupal has this and has had this for years and years and years, more than a decade. Has this been part of the way that we understand that model? And I will say the European Commission is actually a user of Drupal software. And a lot of these best practices that we now see published in major government policies or industry publications or analyst reports like Gartner actually have some of their origins in being proven in open source projects like Drupal. So what do you do if there's one of these highly critical vulnerabilities, right? Like that creates some panic for most people, doesn't it? And how do we mitigate that? How do we make it so that that's not a red alarm, all hands on deck? Now we're paying overtime. We're up in the middle of the night immediately patching. Like what can we do to make responsible security management a manageable, sustainable, cost-effective practice within your organization? So there's a program that was created by the Drupal Association, the Drupal security team, and in combination with founding partners, including Acquia, called Drupal Steward. So this might look familiar to you. This is, if you are deeply connected to the Drupal community, maybe you've been hanging out in the public Drupal Slack on one of the release Wednesdays, looking at the list of GIFs while everyone's waiting to see, oh, is there a security release coming out? Is there a security release coming out? And it gets pretty funny. It's amusing. People keep in good spirits. I enjoy it, actually. But what happens? What's the outcome? Someone from the security team comes back and they might say, it might be what Greggles here is saying on the left, hey, there's no releases today. Or it might be what XJM here is saying on the right, hey, there was a moderately critical release for Drupal core. Now, when you think about your own teams and your own engineering practice, Is the image on the left a sigh of relief and the image on the right high blood pressure, right? Like, is that the kind of reaction you have? Because that's not what we want if we can implement the best security practices. Ideally, we want to create a situation where you are prepared for either outcome, and it's not a scramble if it does turn out to be a security release day. And it can be business as usual. It can be fully integrated into your process. So let me talk about how Drupal Steward helps. So what is it? Drupal Steward is a web application firewall that is put in place to protect sites from known vulnerabilities before those vulnerabilities are made public. So the Drupal Association and the Drupal security team, in collaboration with platform partners like Acquia, can say, hey, we know there is going to be one of these security releases. We can't publish the details in advance, but we can use firewall rules to prevent access to the vulnerable paths, to prevent the vulnerability from being exploited. And this means that you have however much time you need to actually do the update and the patch, or for your support team to do the update and the patch. It doesn't have to happen, within an hour of that security release. It can happen in a scheduled way as part of your regular planning process, which I think is really powerful. So to go into a little bit more technical details, right? For most of the worst kinds of vulnerabilities, critical, highly critical vulnerabilities, there is some kind of exploit that can be as simple as going to a particular path or submitting a form with non-standard characters or these sorts of things that allow some kind of increase in privileges and access to data. Those are the kinds of things that a firewall rule sitting in front of the server can say, just reject all those requests with special characters. We haven't even patched the software yet. It's not out yet, but we can prevent these attacks just by rejecting those requests, right? So in practice, the way this works with the security team is if the security team identifies a highly critical, mass exploitable vulnerability, which I think in the last 10 years has happened maybe twice or even 3 times, not a common problem, but then they will say, okay, can we mitigate this with these firewall rules? Can we say, hey, there's a way to just reject the attack even before we patch? If there is, they release a public service announcement, which you may have seen before, that says, yes, we can. We are going to be releasing soon a highly critical security update, but also the Drupal Steward program can help you mitigate this. And when that happens, we collaborate directly with partners like Acquia to enable those firewall rules, review them in a monitor-only mode, among other things, allowing us to check and see if anyone is trying to exploit that vulnerability yet, and to also make sure that false positives don't reject legitimate traffic to websites. And then we enable those rules so that the moment that patch is released, all of those sites are safe. So if there's a Drupal Steward protected vulnerability, everyone on Acquia who is part of the Drupal Steward program, or everyone who's part of the Drupal Association's version of that program, can be protected from that. And then you have all the time you need to say, yes, we do still need to install that update, but we can do it on our own time. We don't have to have that blood pressure, mad scramble, red alert kind of mindset to handling security, which I think is really important and really sustainable. So Kara, why don't you talk a little bit about this kind of partnership and why Acquia chose to be a founding member to make this happen?
Yeah, so as we've covered, Acquia is a founding member of the Drupal Steward program, right? As we've covered, there are Acquia members on the security team. So that was part of the reason why we decided, we were already involved on the Drupal security team, decided to just go in because what affects Drupal security also affects everything we do at Acquia, since Drupal is our foundation at Acquia. What we do, kind of going from there, just to build off of how you were explaining it works, is that anything that is pushed out in that PSA, we know about it, and then the Drupal Steward program alerts Acquia, and then we can check our end to see if anything needs to be done. And then if something does need to be done, we can either alert our customers that we are going to be making those changes to make sure that everything maintains its secure status, or we will push out that information if anything needs to be done on individual customer applications to make sure that they maintain their security as well. So we decided to join because, Drupal is our foundation at Acquia, and it just made sense for us. It was a no-brainer on our end.
Awesome. And we appreciate it because indeed, part of it is also that the expense of operating the web application firewall and doing this program is just that. It is an expense, but with support of Acquia and other partners in the Steward program, we're actually able to also provide funding to further enhance the Drupal security team operations. It's a really virtuous cycle that supports security of the Drupal project. I want to go back to something that was sort of referenced in the quote at the very beginning that Kara gave from the Gartner report about sort of modern, in the year 2022 and soon to be 2023, modern security posture. There's a really important topic, which is securing the supply chain. So I have another quote here to explain why this is important, how it relates to that. So this is from a researcher, Maya Kozarowski at GitHub, talking about supply chain security. So why does a software supply chain matter for security? So today, software dependencies are pervasive. It's common for your projects to use hundreds of open source dependencies. 203 other projects are the average dependencies within a repository, and you didn't write all that functionality yourself. So what that means is, right, when you're using most software today, it is pulling in libraries, modules, other components from all sorts of other places on the web and assembling that into your full stack, right? In the Drupal specific example, we're using Composer to pull in your modules, your themes, and some third-party libraries as well. So with all these different software sources, how do we ensure that one of those libraries isn't replaced in a sort of man-in-the-middle attack with a malicious version? How do we ensure that the whole supply chain is secure? So Drupal is implementing what I think is genuinely a groundbreaking supply chain security model and best practices for open source. And we're doing it in a way that we want to share with a wider open source community. So there is a specification that was created called the Update Framework, very simple, tough. It's a project of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. There are a lot of big names involved there. Some of these are people who are making autonomous cars, which obviously we want to be very secure. We don't want anyone hacking our autonomous cars. And it's not a technology in and of itself. It's a specification for how a security model can work, how you can create a chain of trust between a package, a signature on that package, and the client that is installing and using that package. If you're cryptographically minded, if you're really you want to really nerd out about it, I would suggest checking out the updateframework.io to learn a little bit more. Rugged is a project that we created. It was launched by the Drupal Association. We did this in partnership with another organization, Consensus Enterprise, which is a new open source implementation of the tough specification as a PHP server project. So what this means is it's basically infrastructure for signing PHP packages with this secure, tough model that allows us to integrate this with Drupal.org so that everything on Drupal.org can be signed, and then allows any systems using Drupal, whether they're platform systems like the Acquia hosting platform or other systems, to verify the signatures of all the components that are being installed on a site. And this was built deliberately to be actually agnostic to the project. It can be used with other PHP projects. So we collaborated even with Joomla, with Typo3. We've spoken to the WordPress folks. We've even spoken to the maintainers of Composer itself to say, hey, we want to prove that this can work to secure the PHP ecosystem. We're going to prove it in Drupal. And when we do so, we would love to see wider adoption by the rest of the ecosystem. We want to make the PHP ecosystem at large as strong as it can be. So we're going to be using this in a couple ways. So you've heard about some new features that are coming up, hopefully in the 10.1 release, maybe 10.2. And some of these are already available as contributed modules. The automatic updates feature that Dries has been talking about for a couple of years now for core is already available as a contributed module, and it can automatically update your site for point releases. And those point releases are usually bug fixes or, as relevant to our topic today, security fixes, right? So we're using this tough and rugged security model to make sure that, hey, when we enable automatic updates of Drupal sites, you're getting the real package, the real security update, and making your site secure. Similarly, that same underlying technology is being used to build out the project browser tool, which is a tool to abstract away from the difficulty of understanding command line composer and how you do dependency resolution, and is just a browser directly in Drupal to let you download and install modules. So that's going to use that same underlying technology to check for secure signatures, to get the right packages from Drupal.org, and again, add this whole extra layer of security as Drupal keeps advancing. I think it's going to be really powerful. So these are a lot of really, really cool things that are just happening fundamentally in the Drupal project. And I hope you find them interesting. Again, feel free to ask questions. We can answer some, use the Q&A tab. We can answer some questions towards the end here. But from here, I'm going to hand it over to Kara to talk about how Acquia takes this foundation from Drupal and sort of goes above and beyond.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. So the first thing I'm going to be covering is risk prevention. And when it comes to how Acquia builds on top of Drupal, I first want to call out everything Drupal has to offer. So next slide, please. So the first thing about Drupal that is very important to know is that after all of the information Tim has covered, we know it's highly secure, right? It has a 30+ person security team. It's trusted by the most mission critical websites in the world. And with over 10K contributors, with it being open source, it means there's no place for bugs to hide. So some of those mission critical websites around the world that trust in Drupal, just an example of them, you can see them on the bottom of the slide. But Australian government, United States Postal Service, the whitehouse.gov, American Express. So we have a wide range of people who trust, all the way from government agencies to banks and banking source. American Express, I believe, is a credit card, but banking retailers as well. And then paired with the Acquia Cloud Platform to bring in all of those different compliance standards that most of these organizations are looking for, Drupal plus Acquia is very secure for your organization's needs. So next slide, please. So then just diving into the features of what Drupal has to offer when it comes to rock solid application security. The first one being those role-based access controls so that you can control who is getting in and who's managing what so that your application is only in the hands of those who need it. There's advanced security features, password policy, reset rules, IP whitelisting for access. The list goes on and on and on for those advanced security features, but all of those are available within Drupal. It's secure by design. It has that expert security team that we've talked about. There's module security coverage. And then last but not least, again, going back to that open source, I know Tim covered on it briefly, but many eyes again means bugs can't hide anywhere, right? If there is a security bug, it's not going to get past everybody because there's so many pairs of eyes on Drupal. So how does Acquia build or add on to all of these Drupal security benefits? Acquia, next slide, please. Acquia offers a couple of different ways, a couple of different packages that you can add on to Drupal-based security. The first one being Acquia Edge Security with Cloudflare. With this, you can get DDoS mitigation with layer 3, 4, and 7 for protection and capability of handling 800+ TBPS capacity. The next one is preemptive threat mitigation. It analyzes up to 30% of internet traffic, interacts with 1.3 billion device clients daily to automatically inspect API traffic. And the last but not least is that intelligent WAF. So again, on top of the Drupal Steward program that offers a WAF style protection, we also have advanced WAF options included in the first Edge security packaging that are available to you. Next slide, please. So the next one looks almost exactly the same, I know, but this one's a little different. This Edge security is offered through Akamai. It offers that same DDoS mitigation, preemptive threat mitigation, and intelligent WAF, but we're also adding on bot management with our Akamai offering. This detects traffic from unknown bots to help get them off of your site and keep them off your site. And it has a directory of more than 1,400 known bots in 17 different categories. So you're not going to have that bot traffic just clogging up your experience for your users. So next slide, please. Now that we've talked about risk prevention, we're going to go into ways to build customer trust by avoiding downtime. So this tags into being scalable and performant. So again, going back to Drupal, what does Drupal offer for being scalable and performant? You can build amazing web applications is no longer enough. You also need to ensure that they are fast and delivered from the edge and capable of handling extreme traffic bursts like the Super Bowl or the NBC Olympics, right? When those two events are happening, there is tons and tons and tons of traffic coming to the site, and your site needs to be able to not only scale for those, but also be performant while it is scaling at the same time. So some of the aspects that Drupal has available for being scalable and performant. There's caching, CDN support with purging, turnkey PWA, static site generation, JavaScript, CSS aggregation, and big pipe. So next slide, please. So again, all of those things add up to that world-class performance and scalability. I know there's a lot of text on this slide, but all of these items work together to be able to deliver that performance and scalability on Drupal so that users can have a great experience while they're on your site. Next slide, please. So how does Acquia Solutions increase the performance that Drupal offers with all of those features? So the first one that it has is Edge Security plus Performance. So this will help increase your brand value by bringing content closer to the user. I have a image on the next slide that we'll get to that'll help show and explain that a little bit more. But after you deliver that brand value by bringing content closer to the user, you can also build trust. So users can make fine-grained changes to improve performance for complex applications. So you can build that trust of your users. And then last but not least, again, just reducing the risk to ensure that your site can maintain its performance and its scalability. So next slide, please. So this is that image that I was talking about. We offer Acquia Edge CDN, which is a content delivery network. It helps store that data where your users are to bring that content to them faster. There's a highly secure global network delivering content 90 to 95% of the world's internet connected population. You can see all of the little dots on there. That's where we're keeping that data stored. And then the other aspect of the slide is accelerated application delivery, cutting load times by up to 50% for dramatically improved delivery of static and dynamic web content. So again, just speeding up how fast the content can get to the user who is trying to, interact with that content on that site. So
I think that's a really good point to emphasize, right? These security features happen on the edge as well. So it's not like you have to suddenly centralize and route everything back through a single data center in Seattle or whatever in order to take advantage of these web application firewall rules or any of these sorts of things, right? You can have your cake and eat it too. You can have these performant experiences that also make your site more secure.
Yeah.
So with that, I think we're ready to sort of wrap it up here and take any questions that might be available. I want to remind you again, you can use the Q&A button in the Zoom toolbar to ask any questions. We have a couple questions that we've gathered in advance as well. And we'll just jump in and go from there. Question here, and this may be for you, Kara. So does Acquia Edge work only with Acquia hosted projects, or can you use Edge functionality with like dedicated hosted services like Amazon or even Pantheon, and also integrate these Edge features?
Yes. So at this time, Acquia Edge, our couple of different offerings with Acquia Edge can only be used with Acquia-based Drupal projects. We partner it with our Acquia Cloud platform. So you get the Acquia Cloud platform and you get all of the base security offerings that it provides with you. And then if you would like the more advanced Acquia Edge offerings, then you can purchase the Acquia Edge on top of that. There are different price ranges for Acquia Edge if that is something you're interested in purchasing on top of that. But at this time, it is only for Acquia-based projects.
Okay, makes sense. So we had a couple other questions that we had gathered in advance. I think I'll go two more here. So one was related to Drupal Steward, which we talked about earlier. If we're talking about sharing firewalls of vulnerabilities, right, in advance of the rule, how do we make sure that that doesn't result in an early disclosure of what the vulnerability is? And basically, this process is we have a very carefully controlled sort of circle of trust, right? The only people who ever have access to understand what those rules are, and therefore to maybe reverse engineer what vulnerability they're preventing, are people who are already on the security team, right? So that's why, for example, Acquia is one of those founding partners, because they have those members of the security team who are already in the circle of trust to understand these rules. So that lets us make sure that we can provide early protection without having to do early disclosure. Which is a tricky thing to balance and is something that we're uniquely capable of doing because of the Drupal security team and the Drupal Association acting as kind of this independent authority for the project. And I think on the last question, I'm going to pick one selfishly, which is, how can someone learn more about joining the Drupal security team? So if you're out there and you're thinking about giving back to Drupal, contributing to Drupal, being a member of the security team is a really powerful thing. And it's not something where you necessarily have to have, the most technical expertise in the world. There's a lot of things that the security team needs. It needs project management support. It needs people who can just, write up a really good PSA. It needs all sorts of things like that. But if you go to drupal.org/security, there is a section in the sidebar that links you to sort of security team policies, and they have a whole process for, hey, I think I might want to help out and contribute on the security team. So I'd really encourage you to think about that. And of course, there's many other ways to contribute to Drupal. So if you want to learn about all sorts of other ways, you can certainly reach out to me directly as well. You can find me on the association staff page on Drupal.org with my email and contact information. But with that, Kara, I think I'm going to wrap it up here. So again, the recording is going to be made available and sent out to all of the registered attendees. If you have questions about the Acquia products, should they reach out at acquia.com? Is there a better way to go, Kara?
Yep, you can reach out on acquia.com and we can get them answered to you there. Or if you are already an Acquia customer and you're just interested in learning more about Edge, you can reach out to your account executive or your account manager, and they can help you connect you with an Edge Acquia expert.
Awesome. And so I'd also, again, encourage you to check out the Drupal Association, again, that I'm a part of. This is the nonprofit that supports the Drupal project. You can become an individual member to support our work. Your organization can become a partner of the association. It helps support the open source work we do. And we appreciate all of our partners, including Acquia. Thank you for all of your time and your support, and we will hopefully see you for the next one.